Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar on positive behavior supports. My name is Sherry Jonah and I am the Manager of Inclusive Education with the New Brunswick Association for Community Living. Thank you for joining our webinar and I hope that you find some important information about positive behavior supports. If you've joined this webinar, I will assume that you are a parent of a child with an intellectual disability within the school system here in New Brunswick. I wanted to start off by explaining who we are at the association. So at the New Brunswick Association for Community Living, we are a nonprofit organization that works on behalf of children and adults with an intellectual disability and their families. We work to ensure that persons with intellectual disabilities have the right to live, learn, work, and participate in community as valued and contributing members. We were founded in 1957. So we just celebrated our 60th anniversary last year in 2017, and we were founded by parents whose children were not legally allowed an education in our public schools. So we've evolved over the years, and now we work on initiatives that touch almost every aspect of the lives of people who have an intellectual disability, from birth all the way to the end of life. So we are a big organization here in New Brunswick, but we are also part of a national and international federation. So there's one ACL, so that's an Association of Community Living, in every province and territory. There's a national association, and we have 10 local associations here in New Brunswick. We have 6 regional offices, and we have approximately 67 staff members. Our offices are in Fredericton, St. John, Moncton, Bathurst, Miramichi, Grand Falls, Edmundston area, and we also sometimes have home offices. NBCL receives over 200 calls per month for support from families, professionals, and community agencies. Throughout the years, NBCL has succeeded in making positive changes in New Brunswick communities, particularly in the area of education and other social policies. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what the Inclusive Education Program at NBACL does, so that you have a little bit better understanding of what we do and how we can help. So we work with policymakers, departments, and school district staff. We work collaboratively with them. We also work with educators, so educators who are right in the schools, working in classrooms, could be resource teachers. When we do that, we have a tool called Creating an Inclusive School, and we go into the school. It's a self-evaluation tool that we have developed, and we do that with a school who's looking to see where they are in terms of inclusion and what maybe some next steps might be for them. We do some school-based training, so sometimes during PD days we will go in and do some training with the school staff. Sometimes it's with the educators and sometimes it's with educational assistants. We also do on-site consultations, so sometimes schools will contact us asking for us to come in and to observe a situation to see if we have any input or work one-on-one with a teacher on it. Could be a lesson, it could be a behavior plan, it really depends on the situation. We also work with families, so we do some family advocacy. So if a family's having a difficult time with a school, we can go in and help support to ensure that that they have the tools that they need. We also provide information and education workshops. So it's important that families have the tools to be able to navigate the school system, to be able to know their child's rights and what some good next steps would be. So we do a lot of work one-on-one with families. And we also share resources with families as well. So we have a tool called Achieving Inclusion. We share that tool with families as we meet them. And there's just different policies in there. We give links to policy to families. We give books sometimes, whatever the family may need. We try to give them as much information as possible. And as I mentioned before, in the training at school, we do training with the educational assistants as well. And those vary from school to school and whatever the need may be. So we take a very active role within the school system and try to help wherever we can to help support children with intellectual disabilities in the school system. So today we're going to focus on positive behavior supports. So positive behavior supports, or PBS, as we'll see throughout the presentation, it's a term that refers to a group of intervention strategies that are highly individualized. They're based on scientific principles and empirical data. They're grounded in person-centered values and designed to prevent the occurrence of challenging behavior. So at the association, we talk a lot about person-centered values, and that is looking at the person first and looking at an individual person. So we're not looking at a strategy that may work for most children. We're looking at one particular child and seeing what exactly needs to be put in place so that that specific child can be successful. And the goal, as mentioned in the last bullet, is to prevent the occurrence of challenging behavior. So sometimes positive behavior supports are implemented to prevent challenging behavior from occurring from the start. And other times we look at positive behavior supports to add on if we are seeing some challenging behaviors. We look at positive behavior supports so that we can eliminate the challenging behavior in some capacity. So the big thing is that we're looking at individual children. So PBS interventions generally involve instruction to enhance the capacity of a child to manage his or her social environment, promoting desirable behaviors, and removing triggers. So we're going to talk a bit at the end about social skills. And when we look at the social environment, often we see that there's challenging behaviors in a social environment, which school is a very social environment. There's children everywhere, there's adults everywhere, and we want to ensure that a child is able to manage that environment successfully. We want to promote desirable behaviors, so it's not about asking a child to stop doing something, it's about teaching a child what to do instead. So perhaps a child is getting bored and they start to fidget or they start to talk to the different members that are sitting next to them in class, or they're getting up and doing disruptive things. It's not asking them to stop doing that, but it's asking or giving them another purpose, something else to replace that behavior. And it's also removing triggers, because sometimes there's things in the environment that we are able to remove that will really help a child. Some students have a really hard time when the announcements come on. There's a really loud noise that starts off the announcements. Some children are not able to handle that sound very well. So what some schools have done is they've changed the way they do announcements. So some of them do videos. So they come up on the smartboard, they play a video, and the children can listen to it at a time that's better for them, just as an example. So the goal of PBS is to ensure that students are socially competent. Social competence means that interaction with other students or others results in a positive effect. Students' ability to interact with others well. So what does that actually mean day to day? So for a child, it's taking turns, doing random acts of kindness, sharing, asking questions in a conversation. Sometimes we work on social skills, but we're not thinking about the end goal. So the end goal is social competence, so that your child is able to go into a classroom and to be able to figure out what their role is within that environment, who they should ask their questions to, who they should sit next to, how to have a conversation, how to take turns when they're playing with someone, how to play side by side with someone, and how to play interactively with someone. So doing all of those things, that is requiring social competence. So PBS, we have 3 different levels of intervention, and I'm going to go through those now. So the first one is primary intervention. Primary prevention strategies are implemented across school settings and for all students within the building. So it's important that we think about all students. We're not thinking about a certain group. We're not thinking about a certain child. These are going to benefit everybody. So some examples that I've seen a lot throughout our province, a lot of schools have tennis balls on the bottoms of their chairs. That could be served for two purposes. One, when kids move their chairs back and forth often, the noise can be very distracting for other learners. And also, if there's a two-level school, when one class is moving their chairs, it's disruptive for the class underneath them as well. So that's a strategy that's used not for one student, but it benefits everybody. Quiet area in the classroom. Elementary schools do this very well. They usually have a quiet corner. Usually there's some books there and maybe a comfy chair, so that students, if they're getting overwhelmed with the whole class activity, that there's somewhere that they can go that's a little bit more quiet. Other classrooms, they have lamps instead of using the fluorescent lights. They have lamps in their classroom instead. The fluorescent lights sometimes bother some students and give them headaches. Sometimes the buzz of them are distracting. Some schools have beanbag chairs, stationary bikes. There's a picture in the bottom here of a stationary bike, and those are becoming very, very popular. The purpose of those bikes is that a student can go on there if they need a break. And it could be a mental break. It could be a physical break. It could be that they need to move their body while they think through something. There's so many different reasons why you could use these bikes. And it's a really, really great thing to have in the classroom. So in this class, if you can kind of see on the corner of the picture, there's some kids sitting on the floor. So what we could assume is happening is that they're learning something on the mat, and this student has decided to learn with their class, but just on the bike. So he's moving his body while he's learning and releasing some energy. Maybe it helps him focus a little bit better, but it's important that it's within the classroom environment so that we're not taking away from education, but we're adding in a tool that's going to really, really benefit a student. Another intervention is allowing students to respond in multiple formats. So UDL, which is Universal Design for Learning, is a way of teaching that allows students to present in multiple different formats. So if we have, we're asking a student to tell a story. Sometimes we expect that to be on paper, but it's also important that a child is able to tell their story orally. Or maybe they want to show it in a painting. How are we going to get the student to really show what they know in a way that is best for them? So next we have secondary interventions. So secondary prevention is intended to support students who have learning and or life histories that put them at risk of engaging in more serious problem behavior. Secondary interventions targets child's needs. So we're not looking at every single student, but there are many students who will benefit from secondary interventions. So an example is frequent breaks. There's many students who, during the course of a classroom, will take a break. Maybe they're going to take a break and do a lap of the school. Maybe they're going to go to the washroom. Maybe they're going to go and do a sensory activity, something that they need to take care of themselves to be ready and able to learn. Having a strong connection within the school. This is so important for all students, but some students require it to be a very purposeful act. So making sure that there's somebody or something that they're very, very connected to at school. Permission to leave the classroom to calm themselves. So perhaps they are right in the middle of doing a science experiment and it's not going well. This allows them to leave the classroom, take a break, relax, and refocus before coming back in. Then we have tertiary interventions. So this is, it's to prevent or it's to address a smaller number of students who may require more individualized and intensive plans. So we have some different abbreviations here. So one is Individualized Behavior Support Plan, so IBSP. There are many students who I may work with from time to time that have an individualized behavior plan. It's a team approach, so it's not one person deciding. It's not the classroom teacher or the educational assistant or the principal. It's really a team approach. We want to see who is interacting with this child and who can best support and see what they really need. Often families absolutely need to be a part of this to know what's going to work best for this child. It's based on a student's unique needs, so we're not pulling it from a filing cabinet and taking out a prescription that's going to match specific students. We're really looking at it and building it from scratch for each student. Some examples could be social skill instruction. So as I mentioned before about social competence, if a student's not able to navigate their social environment, they may need some more deliberate instruction. It could be modeling, so how to go and ask a friend to play. How do you interact with specific teachers? How do you greet someone? Coaching, so this could be done in a variety of settings, but say coaching a student to play with another student, helping them be able to predict the next steps within that. Replacing negative responses with positive responses. So this happens often, I find, in IBSP plans, is that we're looking at a behavior that's negative, and we're saying, okay, this child is looking for attention. How about we teach a child to seek that attention in this way? And we teach them in a positive way. So this I found was very interesting because sometimes we think a child needs more individualized programming than it may be necessary. So tier 1, as I mentioned, so tier 1 is if you can see the little the bars going up this side, tier 1 encompasses all students. So whether or not they're in tier 2 or 3 as well, tier 1 interventions are also there for them. In tier 1, we're looking at about 80% of our students. So the majority of our students in New Brunswick as a whole will be receiving tier 1 interventions. And as I said before, those are the whole class interventions. Then we have tier 2. So tier 2 also encompasses the top 5% as we see there in the red. So we're not looking at them in chunks. We're looking at them at bigger groups. But tier 2, we're looking at the top bit. So we're looking at about 15%. So those are the students that we're looking to get a stronger connection with the school. We're looking to give them breaks, to look at what they need, but it's not as intense as an individualized plan. So then we have about 5% of our students who are receiving individual behavior plans. We're looking at exactly what do they need, and again, it could be the social skills, it could be responding to things appropriately, it could be replacing negative behavior with positive behavior, but it really is only about 5%. So sometimes we focus a lot on the tier 3 interventions when the tier 2 interventions might work just as well. All right, so I'm going to talk about 3 different examples of tier 3 strategies. There are many, many more, but I just wanted to give you an example, a quick snapshot of what they would look like in case you come across them with your child. So we have ABC charts. We have self-management strategies and social skills instruction. So I added in a DE here on our ABC chart. So this is just one example. There are many different examples, and schools do really well at this. So sometimes you may need to ask to see how they're doing it, but a lot of schools are doing this already. So we have our ABCDE chart. So the A stands for antecedent. So I'll go through the list and then we'll talk about what that may look like for an example of a child. So A is antecedent. So what came right before the behavior? B is the behavior itself. C is consequence. So it's not, sometimes we hear consequence and we think of a negative thing, but consequence means what happened following the behavior. And then we have discipline, and discipline is also kind of a negative word, but we're looking at what is the replacement behavior. So it may not be discipline as our first notion of when we hear that word, but what do we want the child to do instead? And then we need to always, always, always end with education. We can't expect a child to know what to do next time if we miss out on the education piece. So on the right side is our example. So we have the antecedent is the child is not getting any attention. So B, the behavior, is the child screams or hits someone. And then the consequence is that they get attention. So all of a sudden, there are students engaging with them, there's teachers, there's an EA. Everybody is all of a sudden very alert and focusing in on this child. It might not be positive attention, but when we go back to the antecedent, the child wanted attention. We didn't specify that they wanted positive or negative attention. So D, I didn't put in a discipline in here because I wanted to ensure that we're focusing on case by case. And for one child, a natural response might be one thing, and another child that might not be appropriate. So I didn't want us to get hung up on what that could be. I will give an example though. So perhaps a child that screams or hits, perhaps a natural response may be that they need to apologize to that child. And then we ask them to ask the child for to play with them. So say they weren't getting attention and they wanted a student to play with them. Then we get them to apologize, and then we say, this is how you could ask for Johnny to play with you instead. And then E is teaching the social skills. So we can't just assume that saying it once is enough. So some students will require explicit teaching of social skills or appropriate responses. So giving them an example, how to do it once, and then bringing it back. And we'll talk more specifically about social skills. So self-management strategies are really, really useful, but they must be taught to the student. So, and they must be target-specific behavior. They must target specific behavior. So, for example, it might be organization. The student must be involved in the process, and the student must have opportunity to practice the strategy, and it must be monitored by the educator. So we can't expect to give a student a self-management strategy and not give them a chance to get used to it. So this could be something, if a student is really struggling with organization, it could be that we're asking them to come to class prepared. Perhaps they never come with a pencil or a calculator or paper. So we are working with the child, and we decide that there are 3 things that they need to bring to class. And that is a pencil, a book to write in, and it's math class, so they need to bring a calculator. So we come up with a little checklist and we put it, maybe it's on their desk, maybe the teacher has it and we give it to them. Because remember, they're struggling with organization. So if we give them another thing to hold on to, that might not work for them in that moment. So then, or maybe we're sticking it in their locker. It depends on the student and where they're at. So they need to be able to look at that list and check off themselves that they have everything. We can't assume that just giving a kid a checklist and asking them to make sure that they have those things on the checklist is going to work, because we need to understand where they're struggling. And usually, by giving a student something without giving them a chance to practice with it, we're just kind of adding to the problem. So another student, maybe they're not working on their task, so they find it's very distracting. They have 4 questions to answer, but they only get done 1 during the entire class time. So maybe they need to have a self-management strategy where they answer 1 question, they get some sort of reward. They answer another question, they get another reward. Sometimes teachers are doing this, or EAs may be doing this with a student, but we're trying to put this on the student because there's not always going to be somebody there for every single task for the rest of their life. So what can we teach a student to do on their own? And the reward doesn't need to be big and flashy. It might just be that they get to sit there without working for 2 minutes, and then they need to get to the next one. Whatever it may be, we need to make sure that we're teaching them, and maybe we do the first one with them, and then the next day we do the next 2, or maybe it's the opposite. So they must be taught. So here is an example. So it's for getting ready for class. So the student would have this with him or her. It could be like taped right to the desk, or if they're in the same class all the time, or it would have to kind of be adjusted for, say, a high school setting. So to get ready for class, the student has to put the personal belongings away. So they would have to circle yes or no. So are my personal belongings away? Yes. Okay. Next one. Binder and pencil on desk. Is binder and the pencil on the desk? No. Okay. They need to do that, and then they can circle it yes. And then quiet and sitting at desk looking at teacher. And then they need to circle that one yes. So it's a checklist, but if the child is not doing something, we need to be able to see, okay, you're not doing that part. How can we help you be successful with that? So it's in this example, it's basically a checklist, but checklists work very well for some people, and other people they don't. So it might be a different example for someone else. All right, now we're going to end by talking about social skills. So social skills are so important, but we need to make sure that when we're teaching social skills that we're doing it in a very appropriate way. So every interaction with another person involves the use of social skills. Every single one. Acceptable social skills are necessary for positive social interactions. So if we don't have acceptable social skills, it probably won't be a very good interaction with somebody else. Either someone may say something that's not appropriate, they may not be able to engage in the conversation, they may be distracted in the conversation, they may touch someone inappropriately. It just won't be positive. Social skills are learned through social interaction. So often we think that teaching social skills need to be in an out-of-context setting. For example, in a room outside of the classroom with an EA. But we aren't going to be able to mimic a social environment unless this child is in a social environment. They need to be able to learn within that environment. It is not to say that there's not skills that they could learn outside and then transfer in, but if we are teaching a student something out of context, we need to absolutely be sure that we are equally teaching them within that context as well. Shelley Moore was here this past fall, and she gave an example of when we teach social skills. It's similar to taking a child who's not doing well with swimming taking them out to the parking lot, teaching them in the parking lot how to swim, and then dumping them back into the pool and expecting them to be able to swim. We need to be able to perhaps give some education outside of the social context, but then we need to give them the appropriate support within the social environment, which is typically the classroom, the playground, the cafeteria, a sports team, whatever it may be. We need to make sure that those skills are taught within that environment, even if some direct instruction needs to happen outside of that environment. So learning and refining appropriate social skills can be a lifelong process. Social skills are not something that we're going to wake up one day and all of a sudden we know all the social skills that we need for the rest of our life. There are social skills that you are going to learn when you come into a brand new environment that you did not know you needed before. The important things is that you're adapting to those environments, but some people need to have more direct instruction. So perhaps a child knows the social skills and how to interact well in elementary school, but then they go to middle school and it's a very different environment. They may need to have some more coaching or guidance. We have verbal and nonverbal behavior. So they are both very, very important. Perhaps nonverbal is even more important. So social skill instruction. So social skills is a component of social competence. So social competence is a big umbrella, and social skills is one under that umbrella. So it's learned directly or indirectly. So sometimes we learn how to interact in a social environment because someone told us exactly or taught us exactly, and other times we just kind of pick it up. So directly means that direct intentional instruction is provided, usually by an adult. So the teacher instructs a student what to say when he or she bumps into another student. So indirect is behavior learned by watching others and seeing others receive positive feedback. So an example would be raising hand in class when you want to ask a question. They see that the teacher always answers the child with a hand raised, so then the student would start to raise their hand. Some students have a very, very difficult time with indirect learning social skills indirectly. So that's why direct social skill instruction is important. So the educator should include nonverbal behavior when teaching social skills. So as I mentioned before, nonverbal social skills are probably far more important than the verbal skills, and especially as children get older. So the look on someone's face when they say something. So we could have someone that says, "Thanks a lot." They're very excited about that. Or we can have someone that says, "Thanks a lot." And although you can't see my face, the tone of my voice would tell you exactly how I'm feeling. If we only teach students to look at the words, they may always think that that's a very positive thing and not understand that their friend is not happy by that. It's important to take into consideration what is typical behavior for a student's age, gender, or peer group. So if a child is in high school and they're using certain slang that's appropriate, we don't want to force a child to not use that because we're teaching them. If a student, we want them to be able to interact well in their environment. So that means that we need to look at what other students are saying in order for them to be socially competent in that environment. And use real life examples as much as possible. So you may be doing some indirect instruction or you may be doing some direct instruction not in context, so outside of the classroom without other kids around, but we need to then practice what we just learned within the classroom environment. So there are so many different strategies when teaching social skills. So I listed here quite a few, but there are far more than this. So there's a social skills curricula. So it may go through right from start to end, different ways to interact socially. Role modeling, role playing, use natural environment, and that would always, using the natural environment is always your end goal to practice. Direct instruction, rehearsal. So rehearsal would be, say there's a play going on at school and a child has never been to a play, has never been in that environment before. We're going to rehearse what they're going to do. So when you come in, you're going to give a ticket to the ticket person. Then you're going to walk in, you're going to find your seat, you're going to sit down, then you're going to talk very quietly to the person next to you until the show starts, those sorts of things. And then actually doing it with them. So rehearsing for that environment. Prompting. So perhaps in class, a child is sitting there and the educator may see that they're stuck on a question. They may need to ask a question to the teacher. Perhaps the educational assistant will whisper to them and say, it's time to raise your hand to ask a question. Those sorts of things. Social stories. Social stories are so important and they're so well used and they're really beneficial for many, many students. Encourage that all social skills training is generalized, and that means that if we learn a social skill in out of context, so in, say, a separate room with a teacher, an educational assistant, resource teacher, that is then brought to the classroom and used and practiced well, then we use that same social skill on the playground, and then we use it, say, at an activity in the evening with you as their parent. So generalization means that it's able to be transferred to multiple different environments and still have the same success. Use a variety of individuals to ensure generalization. Sometimes we stick with one person or a few people. We need to make sure that the child is able to use those social skills with whoever they come in contact with, as long as it's appropriate, of course. Avoid teaching social skills only during a specific class. Use as much incidental teaching as possible and recognize teachable moments. So what can you do at home? So it's important that you look at PBS, so positive behavior supports, as lifelong skills. It's about being socially competent, being able to navigate social situations successfully. We need to ensure that we're putting it into practice at home and every single social context that we're bringing our child to. Be a team member. So when the school's asking for you to be part of their team to develop some goals, be a team member, and then know your child's goals and practice them at home. Some goals will be strictly academic and they will be done at school, and that's fine. But others, particularly social skills, are things that should be practiced at home and should be practiced out in the community as well. So find some time to help your child be able to practice those, hone in on those skills, and to figure out where they may need some extra support and where they're thriving. Thank you so much for listening today. I really appreciate you taking the time to learn about positive behavior supports. Please, if you have any spare time, check out our website at nbacl.nb.ca. If you have any questions, please call our toll-free number at 1-866-622-2548, or feel free to email us at nbacl@nbnet.nb.ca. and provide just a few little details so that they are able to send it along to the appropriate person. Thank you so much. Have a great day.